Welcome back to more Blue Planet, everybody. As always, we have stuff to say before the podcast where we will say more stuff. First, we are super excited to tell you that next week is a new Character Evolution Cast episode with the one and only Jim McClure.
Jim McClure?
Jim McClure. That Jim McClure? Yes, the one you're thinking of. We will be discussing one of Jim's favorite topics, the 8 kinds of fun.
And oh boy, it is a lot of fun.
All 8 kinds.
Yes, most definitely.
I'm sorry, everyone. I apologize.
But we have a reminder that if you are interested in supporting us, one of the best ways to do that is through the One Shot Network Patreon. While we wish that Character Creation Cast could be a full-time job, it isn't. But money from the Patreon does help us and other shows on the network with the cost of equipment and even allows us to go to conventions. Plus, you get access to all kinds of cool rewards. You can find the Patreon at patreon.com/oneshotpodcast.
So, as of the time that we were recording this morning, they put out an episode in the Secret Archive that is James and Mel playing Starcrossed as like the backstory to their characters on the one-shot arc that they just finished. And I want to listen to it so bad because they're in love in real life and also in the game. And it's going to be good. It's going to be good. I'm going to listen to it in a little bit. So, yes.
Now I have to listen.
Yeah, now you need to like back the Patreon and then get access to the Secret Archive and listen to people who are in love pretend to be in love.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, right? What could be better?
Exactly.
Another really excellent way to support us without spending money is to leave us a rating or review. So it helps people find us, lets them know what we're about, and it also makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside.
Very fuzzy. Very
fuzzy. Plus, it means we get to read them to you, like this one, which I will read to you now. It is titled Great Fun by Moriath Lynn from the USA. Amelia and Ryan are right. Character creation really is the best part of an RPG. And they're a delightful duo to lead their guests through creating characters in a variety of different systems. They go step by step through the process, relying on their guests, either game designers or fellow podcasters, to lead the way as experts. Lots of fun.
Thank you so much, Moriath Lynn.
Thank you. We are glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah, and we love hearing reviews like this, and we are very, very low on them right now. So if you want, go ahead to iTunes or Apple Podcasts and leave a review there. And we will go ahead and read it as soon as we get to it on the air.
With all of that out of the way, here is the episode.
Yeah, enjoy.
Welcome back to our discussion episode. Last time we created a group for Blue Planet. This episode, we are discussing the character creation process. We are very excited to welcome back Rich Howard and Jeff Barber.
Hi, guys.
Hello. Jeff was unable to join us for a full character creation session last time, but is able to join us for the discussion episode. So, Jeff, could you go ahead and reintroduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the character that you had prepared for us?
Yeah, name's Jeff Barber. I'm basically Biohazard Games. 20 years ago now, we put out a game called Blue Planet, and you guys are cool enough to want to know more about how that works. I'm currently working on a game called Upwind, which is essentially a love letter to the Studio Ghibli adventure films, and that was kickstarted last year and due out here in the next few months. Most of the time, I'm a high school teacher.
Wonderful. And a little bit about your character?
So I picked a Silva hybrid. Her name is Esther Merriweather. She has been, in the past, worked with the GEO as a native patrol person on Poseidon. She is what's called a newcomer, though she's been here most of 20 years, and a member of the Bright Savannah Hybrid Reservation. It sounds like we decided that she struck out on her own at some point after working directly with the GEO and recruited the rest of you guys to be part of a rural sort of native community focused emergency response team, rather than having the GEO have an official presence in the Sierra Nueva cluster where all the corporate and GEO organizations are anathema. She thought that maybe she could do some good by providing some of those same ERT services in that rural environment.
Very nice. And Rich, do you want to introduce yourself again and tell us a little bit about your character?
Yeah. So my name is Rich Howard. I am a co-creator of a podcast called the Young Justice Files, Whelmed, the Young Justice Files. And I'm also a co-designer with a fantastic team on a Powered by the Apocalypse game called Descent into Midnight. I do some writing for 5th edition material. I used to do some Pathfinder material writing as well. And that's kind of where I am now. And then the character I created, his name's Tane. He's what's called an aquaform. So he is a human, and in this case, descended from the original settlers of Poseidon. He is a human who's genetically modified into what they call a diver. And a diver is, as opposed to a squid, it was the colloquial terms. A diver is someone who's had basically the mammalian dive reflex turned up to 11 in humans. So he can hold his breath for upwards of an hour. He has a lot of what's called myoglobin that stores oxygen in his muscles. His eyes are modified for being able to be underwater, etc., as opposed to squids who are actually modified to be able to draw oxygen directly out of the water and swim as well. He is a native. As I mentioned, his parents were part of the first wave of colonists, but he grew up in the back alley streets of a place called Haven, which is one of the big settlements on Poseidon. So he grew up in a pretty bad, basically a bad part of town. He worked his way out of that by showing his skills as a pilot, first as a tourist, basically navigator, and then got into the local military and became a trained professional pilot for what they call hoppers or jump ships and that kind of thing, and was recruited into this team as the pilot and kind of a bit of a survivalist and pilot, recruited in by our friendly Silva. And by the way, I don't know if we went through it over the last episode. Silvas are a genetic hybrid of gorillas and humans. So she's pretty bulky and buff. There are a couple of different animal human hybrids. Yeah. A couple of human animal hybrids. They tried to do a lot of them, and many of them were not viable. The only ones that ended up being genetically viable were Silvas and cats.
Yeah, there's and not to make it too anamorphish, they've just stolen a few key traits. They're not human-like animals. They are humans with a few characteristics that have been reinforced by some of the genetics of these species.
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay, so Amelia, question, which I don't know if we want to edit out later. We can, I guess. Why those two particular hybrids?
Like Rich said, there was a lot of experimentation in the history of the setting to create better humans. And prior to the advent of Long John, which is sort of the MacGuffin that drives the economy of the setting, genetic engineering was a lot more difficult. It was easier to take sections from animals that already existed and try to incorporate those, much like we're doing in the real world today. And unfortunately, and also as a standard trope of science fiction, one of the first things people tried to do was make better soldiers. And so they wanted them to be stronger. They wanted them to have more endurance. They wanted them to be faster. They wanted to be able to see in the dark. They wanted to enhance their reflexes. And so they looked at a lot of the large mammal species that were either really strong or predatory. And these were the only two strains that proved viable, that actually were reproductive, so that it could make some modifications and create sort of mule versions of different creatures. And actually there are a few in some of the subsequent supplements that, like the mongrel, for example, that actually still exist. But these were the only two that could breed true. And they're the only ones that therefore have still exist generations later. They were essentially in corporate servitude. And once their existence was revealed, there was a big public outcry. The GEO got involved, and essentially the corporations had to give them up. And the GEO has been trying to support them as an institution as much as they can. And so that's why a lot of them work for the GEO. And that's why there are a disproportionate number of them on Poseidon, because they were offered sort of a homesteading opportunity. And that's where the Bright Savannah Reservation came from.
Okay.
It's probably relevant to note that there aren't very many of them, but because players are the way they are, they gravitate towards those types of creatures. So, there are a lot more player characters that are hybrids than exist in the population. Same with the natives. The natives are outnumbered by the new colonists and so forth. But, we know how players are. They like to play the weird stuff. So that's one of the reasons we offer them in the game, but also why they seem to be more prevalent in player character parties.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason in creating the game that you picked those two hybrids? Or was there a scientific reason, or were you just like those seem like they had the attributes that you wanted? Or
I think it's a little bit of everything, right? What are players going to think is cool? So you want to include that stuff in your decisions. Genetically matching up gorilla traits with human traits would be pretty easy because there's such similarity in their genetic code. And then, of course, games love cat people. It seems to be it's ubiquitous across genres. And I think that's sort of was one of the main driving forces for that choice.
And just as I was reading it, I was like, those don't make sense underwater.
They don't. And they weren't meant for Poseidon. They were meant for Earth. But they're here now because of history. They're also, I'll also admit to an homage in those decisions to a book called The Long Run, which is part of a series, I think, by an author named Alexander Key. And he had a number of sort of characters that were animal hybrids, and those were some of the more common was the big cats and the gorillas. And there was a lot of inspiration for Blue Planet from that series. Unfortunately, I don't think he ever finished the series, or at least I've never been able to find the third and fourth books. But
thank you for satisfying my curiosity. I just needed to know why.
Awesome. All right, Amelia, why don't you tell us a bit about your character?
Sure. I chose to make a native dolphin character. I want to name her Gertrude. I don't have a last name, though, because I don't know what a good dolphin last name is. Can it just be any last name?
Within canon, dolphins, cetaceans in general, name themselves generally after their occupation or what currently interests them. And then as that interests change or occupations change, so do their names.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's because they don't use the naming like we do. So one of the essential features of the cetaceans is their echolocation and the communication that they are able to use between each other with that echolocation. So they use what are called sound pictures is sort of the unit of word. And so when you can create a whole image with a single sound or, sort of elongated sound, it's a lot more specific and productive than using human-based phenomes, right? Mm-hmm. So her name may be the dolphin equivalent of Gertrude with a last name, but as far as the rest of the team is concerned, she'll have probably been named whatever she feels like is important to her right now. And then in a week, you may say, well, now you call me this because this is what's important to me now.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's why Rich's pilot character was named Hotshot, because he knew that lots of times pilots are referred to hotshots. So I must be a hotshot now. And an imperfect understanding of human spoken language is what leads to it. In fact, there's a language called interspecies or interspeak, where dolphins can use some limited sounds, but also body position and motion to express sort of a dolphin sign language so that humans can understand it. And humans then speak because dolphins can understand the spoken word, and they can hear it just fine. So the human side is spoken word. The dolphin side is this sort of modified sound and sign language that you can learn as a skill.
Great.
Oh, cool.
And cetacean senses of humor are also a little bit different. They're like a little bit off to the side of human humor. So sometimes the names are drawn off their interpretations of humans, and their humor around humans.
So I chose for professions, want to be a dancer and a diplomat, as acting as sort of a cultural attaché for our little group.
I think the dancer part is awesome because it fits right into a whole bunch of aspects of the setting. There's this thing called the Church of the Whale Song Theogony, which is sort of, without getting into the details of it, it's sort of a cultural touchstone for most cetaceans. It's I guess at first blush, it's sort of a new agey religion-y kind of thing. But it's also a community-based, a community-driven organization that holds the cetaceans together because they lack an old culture, right?
Okay.
They're fairly recent in terms of their uplifting. So they're striving for something that's going to hold them together as a cultural identity. So that's a big part of it. But they have a lot of ceremony and a lot of celebration, and sort of underwater movements are a big part of those celebrations and those ceremonies. So there are like official singers and official dancers who are part of the Church of the Whale Song.
That sounds perfect for what I need. And what about you, Ryan?
I created a cat that is named Archibald Covington III, who goes by Archie. And he is a native born on the planet, which was pretty much one of the first, I guess, native born cats.
His parents would have immigrated.
Yes.
Probably with the GEO homesteading initiative. And then he certainly would have been no more than probably 22 or 3 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's in his early 20s. He studied medicine and science with his parents and with the university, and learned a lot from the other people that are native to the planet. You know, he's very compassionate and likes classical music. He's basically the medic of the team. So he was kind of signed on to this to help people in a very dire situation, and he jumped at the opportunity to be able to do good.
So from here, we're going to go ahead and dive into our discussion segment, which we call D20 For Your Thoughts.
D20 For Your Thoughts?
Ryan, I don't know if you want to go ahead and start us out here?
Yeah, sure. In this segment, we want to talk to our guests about their thoughts on the character creation process, specifically to this system as well as other systems, and how it compares to other systems that are out there. And we also like to get to know the people that we're talking to a little bit. So our first question actually comes to both you, Jeff, and Rich. How did you first get into role-playing games?
One of those classic things, moved to a new town, didn't know anybody, kind of a weird kid, ran into some other weird kids. That new weird kid said, "Hey, I got this thing called D&D. Why don't you come over after school?" And, the rest is history. I was hooked instantly and have been sort of chasing that first experience ever since.
That's awesome. How about you, Rich?
I wasn't a weird kid. I was totally a weird kid. But my brother was a weird kid first. So he was playing with his friends back in the 70s, and he's about 8 years older than I am. So my mom would make him take me with him. I was 6, 7, 8 years old.
So it's your mom's fault.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. And so I would go and I would play this pinball machine they had that was like, they'd rigged it so it was quarterless. And I just play this pinball machine and watch them play D&D for hours. And then eventually I'm not sure if they invited me to play. I invited myself to play. I'm not sure. So eventually they let me sit down at the table, and they tried to give me as innocuous a character as possible. So they gave me a first level elf wizard with, I'm sure, 1 hit point and a sleep spell. But what ended up happening is they kicked in this door, and there was like 16 goblins in the room, and I cast my sleep spell and critted the roll. And so all these 16 goblins fell asleep, and the whole table cheered for me. And that just ended it. I was fully in. Bunch of 16-year-old boys playing D&D cheering for this 8-year-old who had just done this heroic thing. Like, yeah, I want that all the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite the emotional high to really start it out on.
Oh, yeah. It was good. So yeah, that was it. So
Can you guys tell us about your personal process for picking a character type or creating a character in any game that you play? Do you have a usual way that you do it?
Well, despite your tagline for this game that the character creation is the best part of any role-playing game, I'm going to make a confession. I hate making characters.
Rude.
I do.
Yes.
Sorry. But I don't hate it for the reason that you're probably thinking I hate it, right? I hate it for the glut of options and for the promise that making characters implies about the campaign. As I begin to make a character, it takes me forever because I'm like, ooh, I want to do that. No, I want to do that. Oh, no, I want to do that. So I get really excited and I start exploring the setting and I try to make a character that I think takes advantage of what that setting has to offer in a way that another setting might not, because in playing that game, I want to experience something different. So that's usually where I start. And then in the actual process of working out the numbers and such, that's mostly goes hand in hand with trying to develop the concept for the character. Usually I have a little bit of an idea of who I want the person to be, but I don't know about what your experiences have been. I never really seem to realize who that person is until the first couple of sessions of play. And then it just sort of, that voice starts to appear kind of on its own, which is part of the magic of role playing and part of the frustration of role playing. You know, when you start out being one particular kind of character and you end up being another, because that's just where the voice came from.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I kind of had that problem, but I'm usually the person running games. So like Jeff was saying at one point, like he's often running the games. So when I do get to play, recently I try to draw on what do I want personally, right? And recently, at least over the last few years, it's just been like, you know what? I want to be a player in more aquatic games. So, and also I tend to I like playing the kind of support roles. So like, you know, in D&D, I like playing bards. I like playing clerics, right? I like playing the medics and the healers. I'm a nurse. So, you know, I guess that
checks out.
I'm clicheing. Yeah. But I also have a good time at a table when I'm helping other people realize what they want in their character and becoming a part of their story. And then hopefully that reciprocation will happen and they'll become a part of my story.
That's such an extrovert thing to say.
It is an extrovert. Yeah, it is. That's who I am. So it is. And it makes me excited. But that's why I like to run games as well. Like running a game isn't a chore. I love running games. I wish I had more time to devote to running the games because my goal is that makes me excited. It's a workout for my brain, but it also, it basically gives me insight into the psychology of all my friends.
Right.
You know, like, why are you playing this character that seems completely different than what I see you as? You know, like, are you doing it to be different or are you doing it because the way you perceive yourself is different than I perceive you?
Right.
Which I think is interesting. I am also I tend to play things like the nature focused characters. So a native pilot with some survival skill appeals to me, like a scientist or something that it's exploratory for Blue Planet would interest me. I could do that as well. Mostly I tend to walk into games and say, what is everybody else playing? What do you need? What do we need to round out this story? Depending on the system, you know, then I will play that because I can adapt what I want to play to almost anything. Yeah.
So how do we think character creation in this game in Blue Planet stacks up to other systems that we've played?
Well, I'll start with this one. So one of the things that's always fascinated me about the Blue Planet generation system is the fact that, at least particularly in the time that it came out, like Jeff was saying, a lot of games were like, well, what do you do? Right. And there were a few games that asked the question instead, who are you?
Yeah.
And Blue Planet is a game that asks, who were you? Who are you? How did you get to where the game starts? And not a lot of games do that. Like, you have to do a lot of work to like, oh, I wrote a backstory for my character. Oh, wow, that's great. Thanks for writing a backstory. Well, the development of characters in Blue Planet is your backstory, right? So you're picking an origin, meaning there's a place that you came from.
Yeah.
Right. So if you, and then you're picking backgrounds, which is this interesting twist, right? You're like, well, wait, but isn't origin and background the same? No. For my character, Tane, his origin is native. his whole lineage was born on this planet for the last few generations, right? His parents were there when the whole thing started. That's his origin. But his background is he grew up in the streets. So even though he has this genetic and cultural origin with his family, he grew up in a bad part of the streets because that's what the world is like right now.
Yeah.
And then profession stacks on top of that. And that, okay, well, that's where my family came from. And this is what my childhood was like. But what did I do to change that childhood? Or what did I do to play off of that childhood? Or did I embrace that childhood? And so by the time you even start this game, I have this vision in my head of where this kid came from, or where this man came from, because he's probably in his late 20s, and can envision some of the experiences he had. If he was a native and then lived on the streets and then worked his way out of that and joined the military to become a pilot, at least even if it's the native militia military to become a pilot, I have a really solid vision.
Yeah.
As opposed to, say like my Cleric of Poseidon character I played in a campaign for a while, I knew what he did.
Yeah.
But I had to really okay, now they have backgrounds in 5th edition, so I can be like, okay, he was a noble, but how is he different?
They're still only one sentence backgrounds.
Yeah.
Right. They're little backgrounds. They add a little bit. They're much better than they used to be. I think it's great. I like it. But if I make 3 characters who are nobles, my brain is going to make them very similar unless I really work to make them different. And here, all 4 of us are technically playing basically natives. Mm-hmm. But all of us are very different,
exactly,
right, from our backgrounds and our history and our family because of the way that this system layers on itself. And then the other thing is, when you pick these professions and backgrounds, it's not just the narrative, written word, which is really interesting when you're reading these backgrounds and professions, but also it gives you a whole bank of skills. And in other games, you don't get to do that. So, you're the medic, Ryan.
Yeah.
But also Jeff's character is an EMT. And just as a part of the backgrounds that I picked, I also have a little bit of knowledge of first aid. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're in another system, you're either the cleric or you're not. You're the healer. And if you're the healer, no one else needs to be the healer. Right. That kind of thing. And instead it's no, there's a perfectly reasonable reason why I know some first aid skills. And I may get stuck in a really bad situation where Ryan is, critically wounded and we don't have the medic, and I need to draw on something, and it makes sense that I have that. Right. Mm-hmm. And it allows you to have a little bit of skills in some broad and interesting areas, while also being really good at the thing you're good at, which not a lot of systems can do. And I love it.
It really feels like you dive deep into who these characters are, instead of just what they can do, which is really fascinating from what I found.
Right. And a lot of classless systems can do that. I like the way that Blue Planet does it.
Yes.
Well, I like the ability to kind of mix and match those things that you don't get with classes. You say, I am a bard, I am a cleric, I am whereas we all picked, there were some things that we all picked similarly, but because of other choices that we made, kind of put together all of these pieces in a very different fashion.
Well, here's another thing too. This idea that okay, we drive a character party generation on, let's all do different roles so that we can work together as a team, which all makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But both of the 2 of you picked native and university.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know about you, but I met a lot of my good friends in university. So we all had university background, right?
Right.
But we can hang out together and have different skills and focuses and work together as a team, even though we all had at least one part of our background be similar. Mm-hmm. So you guys can have known each other, right, from university and have that rich history, but still be very different characters and still play different roles in the party.
Yes.
But allowed to have that. And it's not something you actually see in a lot of role-playing games.
No.
So I think if the question is, how does it stack up? I think it's a little bit dated, but I still really like the final product. I think it does a great job of creating a person that seems realistically skilled and capable and fits into the setting because of the background and training choices you make. I think where I could admit that the system sort of falls down, especially in relationship to more modern mechanics is that it doesn't really address the psychology of the character, right? There's not much to talk about or to give mechanical context or mechanical push to issues they might be dealing with or desires and hopes they might have. I mean, there are character goals is something you choose, but there's no mechanical push to push you towards that. For example, like in gumshoe games where you can gain some of your advantages by actually pursuing your goal, or you're penalized by not pursuing your goal when you choose not to. We didn't really include any of that in this mechanic set, and I think that's probably the place I would point to first if I was saying that where it's most dated.
Yeah, but in defense, sorry, Jeff, sit down. I'm defending you against yourself. So in the era in which that Jeff and I grew up both playing games and hacking games and that kind of stuff, trust me, the idea of mechanizing emotional or sociological or character interaction concepts came up a lot. And the solutions were bad. Like, it was taking the options of what you can do with the role playing of your character. It was basically saying, why is the game telling me how to role play my character? Yeah. Right. That was the reaction that we had, because we had not developed mechanically the game design aesthetics of being able to mechanize ways to encourage people to play a particular way without limiting what that was. Now, in the last 10 years, we've developed all kinds of amazing and interesting ways to do it. But it wasn't really a thing back then. People would literally fight against a mechanic that mechanized your ability to role play back then. Yeah. And I think that's important to note when you're looking at a game like this. And honestly, original versions of games like D&D, people are like, oh, there's no social mechanic. Well, yeah, but you weren't playing it back then. You don't know what that was like. There was no environmental pressure to create that mechanic. Yeah. Right. It was discovered after literally decades of layering mechanic on mechanic and mechanic.
And the evolution of the hobby.
Exactly. And it's great. I agree with Jeff. If we were going to do a third edition, I would want to incorporate some of those mechanics, but I don't think it necessarily draws away from this character generation mechanic as much as Jeff is saying.
Jeff has been incredibly hard on this game for being dated, and he needs to settle down.
You're hardest on your own children.
That's fair, but you also don't know how to edit your own stuff. Let other people tell you what it's like.
But you love your children more than other children, so
that's true. It's very true,
even with all their flaws.
Yes,
that's a valid metaphor, though. I think, like, I love my children dearly, but I am very aware of all of their flaws because I spend much more time around them than other people. So, maybe that is a good way to look at it.
And I'm also talking from a perspective of where the last 3 years I've been working feverishly on a very narrative game that approaches role playing very differently, and recently have been last week I played my first Powered by the Apocalypse game, which, considering how long it's been out, it's kind of a surprise it's taken this long. But, it's a good example of the kind of thing we're talking about.
Yeah. I still haven't played one. I've made characters for one, but I still haven't actually played a PBTA game. So has that made you, has writing a more narrative game made you more aware of the flaws or what you see as the flaws in this one? Or was it something that you kind of always knew and just didn't know how to adjust?
No, you don't go from writing a simulationist game like Blue Planet to writing a narrative game overnight. Like I just started, as I got older, I was less concerned about the simulationist stuff and was more interested in just the arc of the story beats, and the emotions driving the characters. And that kind of led to Upwind being like it is. It also, a Studio Ghibli film is not a simulationist story. Right?
No.
You want to be able to model that sort of like fanciful wonder, and you can't do it with a more grindy mechanic system. So at the time, Blue Planet did exactly what it was supposed to do. Upwind does something different. Powered by the Apocalypse does something different. I've just gotten really much more open in what I want out of games. Like, everything is good. It used to be, I just wanted it to be realistic. I wanted to feel like I was there. Now I'm much more open about my own design, but other people's work too. And just like the idea that there's so many possibilities in all the different sorts of mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's something for everyone out there. That's half of why we're doing this, is just to see what all the choices are.
Well, I tell people a lot, like when you're critiquing something. Recently, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but I'm doing the April tabletop role-playing game daily challenge where they ask a question every day.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions, which mine hasn't aired, that hasn't come up yet, but one of the questions was, what kind of critiques do you prefer? And I tell people this in critiquing all the time, whatever you're critiquing, you could absolutely tell somebody what doesn't work, what isn't working for you. And if you can be, kind of specific about it, that's helpful. The problem is that everybody wants to do that. And the other thing that is incredibly helpful to people is making sure that they know what does work. Because if you only tell somebody, if you love everything, but you tell them the 3 things that are terrible and don't work, then they're like, okay, well, what? I guess, do I change these other things too? Like, I don't know what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you tell someone like, man, this part sings, this part needs some tightening, then they're like, oh, okay, good. Well, I got a foundation here and that's working. Let's see what I can build off of that to go to the next place.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do appreciate what Jeff's doing. There are things about this game that are 20 years old, and that's perfectly fine, right? And you do need to recognize what those things don't work, but you have to recognize what does work as well. And even if it's just the through line or the theme of what was being attempted, so that you can carry that forward into the development. And for me, this layering of origin over background over professions, I think is fantastic. I love it.
I also just think that there's value in taking time to realize that not everything is for everyone all the time.
Right.
And, as someone who has always sort of preferred more narrative games, despite the fact that I have not played that many of them, because that was not what my group was interested in. There's value in understanding that some people like those really crunchy games. Some people, even at different times in your life, or, just when you're in a different mood, sometimes that simulationist thing is what you're looking for. And sometimes you just want to tell a really weird superhero story, and that's okay. It's, I think, important when you're critiquing things to take a minute and say, okay, who is this for? And is it accurately or appropriately catering to that demographic then?
That's really well put. Yeah. Yeah. Really well put.
So I think we accidentally answered the next few questions. So in the interest of time, I think we'll jump ahead a little bit. How balanced are the different, for lack of a better word, classes in this game?
Absolutely not. And that was a design intention. There is no balance at all because it's essentially a point buy system that's made some of the choices for you in the training packages. And there's the different power levels. You can have, I think it even says in the text, you can have a street urchin playing alongside a super soldier if that's what the game master and the players want to do.
Yeah.
If there's a reason for that story to be told. And that's why, is so that you can tell any story you want. I still don't believe in game balance in the same way that I think it's a religion amongst some people. Role-playing games have sort of lost the gamist part of, or at least expanded beyond the boundaries of gamist in ways that they can be perfectly satisfying and have disparity amongst the characters. And Blue Planet was designed with that intention on purpose, which at the time was pretty uncommon.
Yeah, and it seems like a very realistic approach too. Like when you're trying to go for a very realistic setting with realistic feeling science behind it, in the real world, you've got that sort of disparity between people. You've got like soldiers in the military that are going to be way better at doing combat and survival stuff than Joe Average down on his luck, from Smallsville, USA. If you put those two people together in a group, there's going to be this huge difference in how they handle the situations. But if there's a narrative reason for them to be together, it really is all about how you can tie that story together and not about what can they do.
Yeah, and it doesn't work for everybody, just like Amelia was just saying. But it is something that your group has to be okay with before you do that. Obviously, you could say, okay, everyone's going to be exceptional power level characters. And then theoretically, they have the same resources from which to build their characters. So theoretically, in as much as we were able to balance those numbers, they're going to be equally capable. But I don't think I've ever told a group of people playing Blue Planet that this is the power level you have to play.
Right.
And so I think you do want to make sure your group is on board with it. But beyond that, I don't see any mechanical reason why you have to have balance.
Well, and I'm going to do what apparently is my job here and counter Jeff on a few points. Because it depends on the system you're playing. So if you're looking at something like, say, Pathfinder or 3rd edition D&D, where you have unbounded accuracy, right? So you have a 5th level character versus a 20th level character. That disparity is going to be enormous in every level of the game, right?
Well, but that's sort of a little bit apples and oranges, really.
Well,
right?
I'm getting there. Right? So some of that aspect, right? Say if we just look at hit points, right? There's no hit points in Blue Planet. And part of the way the game plays, which again is quite realistic, is that if you have someone with a knife, they could kill you with it. And
Just
someone
like
with someone with a giant handgun could also shoot you in the head and not kill you. Right. So the way that the system is designed allows for both of those things. A little kid that stabs you with a knife in this system could potentially put you into a critical character situation. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about a game like D&D, where a 20th level character's got, 200 hit points and all this stuff, and a 5th level character doesn't, then that disparity of that game mechanic balance is going to show itself. It's going to be real apparent. Though technically you're right. A person who's got who's a exceptional versus some other level is going to technically have a few more points and different skills and how they pan out. Even characters who are at the same power level, depending on their backgrounds and everything else, their skills will stack on top of each other so that, well, I'm a combat pilot and my combat piloting skill is 8. But no one else in this party has a skill level of 8 in anything because of the way that they've picked their backgrounds. Mm-hmm. Though technically we're still the same level, they just may have skills, spread out. Yeah. There are ways to shine in the game that are aside or different from, okay, I'm a killer whale with a body of 15 and you're a human with a body of 0. If I hit you, it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
It's the way that the mechanics work. Although you can look at them and say, yes, technically, I guess maybe they're not quite balanced, but the disparity is not as extreme in Blue Planet when you're playing different power levels.
In the setting, right? In D&D, you've got this idea that eventually you become godlike. Well, right. There's no godlike characters in Blue Planet.
Exactly.
You just never have that range, even after lots of advancement.
Right. Mm-hmm. And it's the way that a game like Masks deals with disparity. If you have the classic example, if you have Hawkeye and Hulk in the same, party, how do you even have a game? Yeah. Well, if you're looking at it from D&D or Champions standpoint, you're right. That's going to be rough. But if you're looking at it from Masks, it's like, oh yeah, it's perfectly valid. Hawkeye could be in a wheelchair and have like all kinds of problems. Like in the comics, he's deaf. Like all these things that would be like quote unquote disadvantages in another system, they're not relevant because the game system doesn't focus on those things. The game system focuses on how do you feel and who are you and what are you inside. And in Blue Planet, it focuses, to me, the system focuses on, sure, there's a lot of skills and there's a lot of primary attributes and they kind of have this simulationist feel. But all of that, to me, is just like, this is just the knife to get to the cake. And the cake for me is the story and the richness of the history and what develops between that interaction with the setup that Jeff and his team created, which is civil war and politics and native versus colonialism and, this gold rush with xenosilicate, Long John stuff and, interrelationships between literally different species. Like that's the cake. The mechanics are solid. They're good. They get the job done. They do stuff that I want to see, which is I hate seeing a knife do a D4 damage on somebody who's got 200 hit points. It just bugs me because I'm a nurse and I want to see. I would like to see the drama being not about combat. The drama in this game is like, don't get into combat. It's bad. right? So if somebody is a GEO soldier and is really good at combat, that's great. You're going to need that once in a while, but please don't put me in a combat if we can possibly help it. Where D&D asks for the combat, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a solid point, though, too, because, I mean, you think about if it is a simulationist kind of game, you know, if you quote unquote level up in real life, if you graduate from college or you've been working out at the gym or whatever, it's still going to hurt if you get stabbed. Right. No amount of time put into crunches is going to make bleeding out not lethal. And so that is not a realistic thing. And if the goal of this game is to simulate some of that realism, that's not how it should work.
And so if we talk about how a game system, how a game mechanic should guide players or a moderator, a game master to a particular experience, whether Jeff and his team intended it or not, which only he can speak to, the game itself, when you get into combat and realize how potentially lethal it can be, you very quickly figure out that that it's better to talk your way out of it, right? So the game itself is guiding you toward a thing where if a combat happens, there's anxiety.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're shooting, something went wrong.
Yeah. If you're shooting, something went wrong. How many action science fiction games do you know of that have that draw to it? They don't lead you there. Our game, best role-playing game I've played in 40 years, it wasn't a single combat.
That's awesome.
The whole thing, and I don't even know, we made a half a dozen, maybe 10 skill rolls.
At the end, somebody drew a gun, but decided not to use it.
Yep. And awesome. That was the fact that they chose not to use it was absolutely critical to the experience that ended that was the end of that game.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that I think may be happening. This is why I'm countering some of Jeff's point. I'm not just a big fan of the game, but I'm a big fan of the game for a particular reason. And from a player's standpoint, whatever their intention was in creating the game or presenting the game in a particular way, I was as a player on the receiving end, and what I was getting was a very specific message. Yeah. Right. That may or may not have been what Jeff had intended.
Jeff, was that what you intended?
Are you speaking about the system, Rich, or are you talking about the game at Gen Con?
Oh, the system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in game design, I know everyone has different processes, but for me, you always have to reference back to one of whatever your main intentions are. And if your main intention is to create a simulationist sort of experience, then that's sort of what you're referencing. And so the decisions about where you're going to guide choices, well, those are left to the players because you're trying to create touchstones that feel real, and then they can make real decisions about them, right? So it wasn't that we necessarily intended that people avoid combat, but we did actually do research into trauma and death associated with shooting. And that's where sort of our will and trauma roles come from, and why you can still get shot a couple of times and keep acting, or you can get shot once and be dead, because that's how real life works. And if your character is willing to risk that, then that's a choice your player makes. If they're not willing to risk that, then that's a choice your character makes, the player makes. Right?
And I think the gut instinct when you hear something like that as a player is like, oh no, I don't want to create this character and just get shot once and die. Okay, well, it's not quite like that. It becomes, it is a potential for that to happen, but it's not necessarily likely. And there's plenty of spots along the way to stop yourself from getting into that situation in the first place.
The session doesn't consist of kicking indoors and fighting what's inside.
Right.
So that's just not part of the story that are typically told in Blue Planet. Though you can play a Spec Ops team that kicks indoors and gets in fights, but then they're going to be heavily modified with lots of armor and cryo and cryo repair units. And I mean, there's going to be options to keep your character alive.
Right. If Amelia's character is unable to do her job, or like something bad happens, or if I get us into a criminal back alley somewhere and it goes south, I'm going to be real glad Jeff's character's there to help us get out of it because of their combat skill. But his character might be the best combat skilled person you've ever built, and they may never use those skills if we do our jobs right.
Right.
Does have meteorology too, so
right, exactly. I do too. I had meteorology.
It's not all guns.
Right, exactly. And that's again part of the advantage of the system is when you're picking these. So you have for us, we have 5, 6, 7, basically 8 different things we're picking to as jigsaw puzzle pieces to plug together. And that makes the characters in some way, even though it does look like a lot of skills, it also makes them broader, more rich. Like your gun specialist also has meteorology too and sailing, or whatever. And like you see them as a more fulfilled, broad character.
Well, and there's nothing worse than going into a game and having a very specific character concept and then just having that not come up at all. Like, I built this character to do this one thing, and then that just, for whatever reason in play, doesn't come up.
Right.
And so it's nice to have those broad things. And you think about in real life too, like even if I don't, but if I did know how to shoot a gun, that is not the only thing that I know how to do. I am a well-rounded person.
And in other systems that are quote unquote more game balanced, like this generic term game balance that we're using here, if you either have to specialize or you broaden. And if you broaden, you're usually not that good at any little thing. And if you don't specialize, you're doing it quote unquote wrong. And that bothers me. And in Blue Planet, that just doesn't come up as much in other games. And I appreciate the system for that.
It sounds like we answered pretty much the rest of our questions throughout this conversation as well. Aside from a few very specific questions, that should give us enough time to jump into our character advancement section where we discuss character advancement in the system. And why don't we go and do that and take it up a level?
Take it up a level. Take it up a level.
So character advancement is actually not nearly as big a part of the game as it is with something like Dungeons and Dragons, which character advancement, I think, is sort of one of the hearts of D&D, and especially in all the user research they did as they developed new editions. That was sort of a central element that they wanted to emphasize and always keep. In Blue Planet, it's very incremental. It's a couple of character improvement points at a time, so that the idea being if you do a thing in the game, there's a chance that you got better at that thing. You earn some points based on some guidelines we offer, but even those are pretty simplistic. And then you can use those to advance things that either you used or that you can justify having worked on in your downtime. Nothing elaborate. I think the rules for advancement are less than a page. And so without levels, there's no major power jumps. And the only way to sort of dramatically increase your capacity in a short period of time is to get a biomod of some kind.
Okay.
And gain sort of additional powers or abilities through that.
Yeah, and it's a real straightforward system. Basically you get a certain number of character points at the end of a game, and they're usually 2 to 6 or 7, something like that, maybe. And then if you want to increase a skill, you spend the amount of what he called character improvement points, or chips, which I thought was really clever.
Oh, okay.
You spend those. So my character's got an aquatic skill of 6. So if I wanted to get to 7, then you have to spend the points of the level. I think it's the level that you're going to, or the level that you had. I can't remember.
It's a progressive scale so that you can't get the ridiculously high skills without really investing a lot of resources.
Right. It's very similar to the way that Fantasy Flight's Edge of the Empire does it as well. Mm-hmm. You can increase things, but you have to, spend a certain number of points based on whatever the previous skill level was, kind of thing. And so, and there are other systems that do that as well. But again, that really, take your aquatic 6 to an aquatic 7. So it ups it by 10%, which is nice, but it takes a while to get there. And again, it tightens things up. It's this thing that D&D did with its newest edition with this bounded accuracy to let's tighten the disparity up a bit. And so again, plays back into what we were talking about the game balance aspect, where these are tightened up, and you can also spend a few points here and there on your lower level skills to take a 2 to a 3 or a 3 to a 4 pretty easily. So those things that you have some training in, you can feel like you really do feel like a 3 to a 4, a 10% from a 30% to a 40% feels like a pretty healthy jump. Yeah. Right. Where an 80 to a 90%, it's like, okay, yeah, I can stick with the 80. 80 is solid. I don't need to go to a 90, that kind of thing. So you get to that depth and breadth again with the system.
Yeah, and I know when I was going over character creation at the start, there's that little chart that says, these are the numbers for these various categories, for the everyday, for the exceptional, and for the elite. And I noticed that everyday, the max level, quote unquote, was 4. max level for exceptional was 6 and elite was 8.
That's as you buy the character points initially.
Yeah, it's just at the beginning of the game. So you can go above that. You can go above that with the character points that you get through adventuring. It's just when you initially create your character. And with that. And one of the fun examples that I mentioned earlier, I think before we were on the air, that Jeff brought in, was that you can mix and match those. So you could have, like exceptional or elite level skilled people while keeping the characteristic maximum of, your common everyday person, and be playing, for example, a bunch of like retired adventurers or retired explorers or retired soldiers who maybe their ability scores aren't quite what they used to be, but their skills are really good.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of mix and match that to create some things that some other systems don't do very well. Like it's hard to play the grizzled old fighter who's level 15, but has some achy bones and isn't quite as good as they used to be. Yeah. It's hard to do that in say a D&D or a level-based system. But here you can do that pretty easily, and I think that would be a fascinating game concept.
Oh, definitely. Yeah,
I have a philosophy about sort of the whole game balance and level or not level characteristics, and the idea of game versus storytelling, because we assume that the game master is infallible and that every penalty or bonus that they suggest during play is somehow calculated by a perfect calculus. And so there is a game with rules like a board game that isn't being violated. But it is so easy for game masters to make mistakes. It is so easy for even things as sophisticated as the CR rating to be misbalanced against a character party. And ultimately, the whole game or the argument that it's not balanced or it's not fair or whatever goes out the window when you truly assess the impact that a game master can have positively or negatively on all of the numbers in a game, simply by virtue of them having to deal with 1,000 variables as they tell this story. So I think just accepting that role-playing games are inherently not games in that regard, and not therefore perfectly bounded or perfectly adjudicated, I think makes it just a lot easier to frame the discussions like this.
Yeah. And I think it even aside from mechanics, again, because D&D is most people know something about it. Like, it's even just choices. So back in the day where there was a problem with the idea that Rangers have this favorite enemy, well, that's great. You're really good against this favorite enemy. But if the DM never puts that creature into your game ever, then suddenly you're definitely not balanced versus the other players, because you have a whole mechanic that's not being used. Or if you're great in a particular terrain or that kind of stuff, this DM fiat thing, which is a challenge. So I totally back Jeff's input on, like, adding a bonus or giving advantage or whatever it happens to be. But it's also just in the choices that a DM can make. Sometimes we make mistakes and we realize we're not giving somebody the spotlight or allowing them to play that character like
some GMs
want to play. Yeah. Definitely not me. And
Well, and sometimes, those are the kinds of things that you even occasionally don't realize until later, too. You get halfway through a campaign and you say, holy cow, we've been really focusing on this one thing. And, time to sort of shift the focus and move away from that, too.
Right. But I mean, that's one of the reasons why we play games. I mean, I had a great time playing 4th edition D&D. But 4th edition D&D swung the other direction. It was so game balanced that you could not do anything improv or it broke the system. And we had a great time with it, but it was a board game. And there's a reason why you play role-playing games versus board games. And the reason is freedom, or role-playing games versus video game, because there's a particular type of freedom that you can utilize with that. So I back Jeff on this theory.
So I think that pretty much wraps up a good discussion portion of the episode. So,
any last words?
Yeah, any last words, you guys?
Well, I'm sitting here looking at the Open Blue Planet book, and we didn't mention there's a little throwaway sidebar that's always been one of my favorite parts of character generation.
Are you talking about 20 questions?
Yeah.
Okay,
I love how it's just in there.
Happy to see that.
I talk about it being dated, but at the time that was kind of progressive.
Huge.
Right? It gets at some of the things that other games have now incorporated into their mechanics. Here, it's just, you can do these if you want to.
Yeah.
With no mechanical consequences. But I think for people who do want more more out of their characters, but don't know how to do it themselves, this kind of thing, at least in Blue Planet, is valuable.
Definitely.
There were a lot of things that Blue Planet did, aside from mechanics and aside from how many skills and blah, 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 that I think natural selection, the supplement that's their quote unquote monster manual, is what every monster manual should have ever been and should ever be. It's a balance between telling you about the world that the characters live in, about survival, about ecology. It tells you about so much about what these beings, these animals and these creatures are doing in the world. And not just, okay, here's a thing you can run to on a random encounter table, right? It's about the thing. Yes, there's mechanics to use because you need mechanics. It's a game. I mean, you do. That's fair. But it's more about like, what is this? They're talking about microscopic organisms. They're talking about like innocuous plants. These aren't plants that are just trying to kill you. They have those, but like, it's just, what is this thing? Like, there's literally a shrimp in there, a shrimp analog, and it's got a recipe for like how you would probably eat this at a restaurant. Do you know what I mean?
It's actually a real recipe. Sure.
Right. So this book and when you're talking about things like 20 questions, in addition to the setting being brilliant and all the stuff we're talking about and the challenges and the upsides to the mechanics, the way the books are written and how they're presented, this oceanography for gamers. Here's what you need to know. Here's what you need to worry about. Here's what you can hand wave and don't worry about. All of this stuff, I wish more and more games would use what Jeff and his team's layout and presentation did for this game in every other game I've seen. And it goes for everything. Fluid mechanics, which is their technology thing. Frontier, where is it? It's right in front of me. Frontier Justice. Thank you. I was thinking Frontier Law, and I was like, that's not right. Frontier Justice, which literally talks about all of this stuff that we're talking about legal battles and about politics, and do you want to run crime dramas and all this kind of stuff. It's just brilliant. And I'll stand by it.
Rich, do you like this game?
No.
When Rich likes something, everybody knows it.
It's true. He can't hide it.
No.
One thing I'm surprised that didn't come up during a discussion, and maybe not because it's not directly relevant to character creation, but it's a huge element of the setting, which could inform your choices about your party and what you want your story to be, is that we didn't mention the Aborigines at all.
Yeah, I was trying not to spoil that, but yeah.
Yeah, well, but they exist, and it's, they're part of the common knowledge of the characters, but they're also part of this 90s era meta story that when the colonists discover not long after their arrival that there's another probably sentient species on the planet, but it's alien enough that they're not sure. And only now, as there's a directed effort, are they beginning to believe that, yeah, it probably is. And then that ties into sort of all of the
it ties into where the xenosilicate comes from, why it acts the way that it does is maybe not by chance or evolution. Our game at Gen Con had to do with the Aboriginals directly making some choices having to do with a particular human on this station that was missing that we didn't realize. We thought it was a political thing, and then it turns out to be this kind of existential, deep thought process of whether this person is in a better place now or not. Like,
they're an intentional MacGuffin for game masters, but for people making characters, it may be that's, there want to be scientists that are pursuing this, or bounty hunters that want the claim or money or whatever.
Or conspiracy theorists trying to figure out what this is, yeah, for sure.
Oh, see, and like, I'm not a science person necessarily. Like, some of the biology part of it doesn't appeal to me as much, but like some of that, like the consequences of colonialism and, like all that kind of stuff as a politics and history nerd, I'm like, I want to play that game. I want to like dig deeper into that. Oh.
Well, one of the
see what I mean?
The project.
Rich, what have you done?
The project that so we set up throughout the books this kind of growing insurgency in a particular region, and if we do transition to a third edition, one of the books that we never got to do was sort of the insurgency, the war that leads to an independent Poseidon, and that would be a campaign book, but also a source book for that transition to like a third edition. And I've been slowly sort of building that campaign, and just need to find a group of people that want to play through it, because that would have to happen first before we could really do that third edition.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I have no interest in playing in that game. Don't even.
Don't even look.
No, I mean, that's because that's a sort of area that really grabs my interest. And I think it goes back to what we talked about before, that you can play kind of anything in this setting.
And there's ups and downsides to having that freedom, right? The paralysis through analysis we were talking about with character generation as well can apply to a setting. But for me, this setting gives you enough kind of bumpers in the bowling alley to be able to head you in the direction of the game that you want to play.
Definitely. I think the answer is that you just have to play more games of it. That might be, just so that you get a chance to try out all the options and then know what you like.
Certainly room for any kind of game you want, and that's not always true of most settings.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us to talk about Blue Planet and the character creation. Rich, can you go ahead and remind everyone where they can find you and what sort of things you're working on?
Yeah, for sure. You can find me on Twitter mostly at the Twitter account for Descent into Midnight. That's at DIMRPG. You can also find me at the YJ Files for Whelmed, the Young Justice Files. Both of those have links to my personal Twitter account, which is at Umbral Walker, UMBRALWALKER. I'm also on Facebook. You're welcome to message me there. And really just either one of those social media sites are the best way to go.
You can find my latest project, Upwind, on our website. Should be hitting shelves soon. That's biohazardgames.us. And you can reach me through email at jdbarber@gmail.com. And you can follow me at Twitter at biohazardjeff.
Wonderful. Thank you both again so much for sitting down and agreeing to do this with us.
My pleasure. Absolutely.
You bet. Thanks, Jeff. Sorry to argue with you so much, Jeff.
Not at all.
Oh, so much fun. Thank you.
Yes. All right. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Creation Cast is a production of the One Shot Podcast Network and can be found online at www.charactercreationcast.com. Head to the website to get more information on our hosts and guests, or even find some of our character sheets. Character Creation Cast can be found on Twitter at CreationCast. I'm one of your hosts, Amelia Antrim, and I can be found on Twitter at Ginger Reckoning. Our other host, Ryan Bolter, can be found on Twitter at Lord Neptune. Music for this episode is used with a Creative Commons license or with permission from the podcast it originated from. Further information can be found within the show notes. Our main theme music is Hero Remix by Steve Combs and is used with a Creative Commons license. This podcast is owned by us under Creative Commons. This episode was edited by Amelia Antrim. Further information for the game system used and today's guests can also be found in the show notes. If you like the game systems discussed and wish to purchase them, links to the products can be found in the show notes. Also check our notes or the website for cool stuff to go with each character, like dice or mixtapes. Thanks for joining us. And remember, we find that the best part of any role-playing game is character creation. So go out there and create some amazing people. We'll see you next time.
Let me do a quick test, though. Just test. Jeff Barber's my hero. Test.
Oh, you're my hero. Wonder Twins.
I just want to point out that I have continued my effort to wear related clothing every time we record, and that this shirt has tiny crabs on it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Nice. It's going to start to become a something you have to do then.
Yes. That's true. I've managed, I think, every one of them except maybe Starcrossed, I think was the only one that I didn't.
But how do you prep for that? Any shirt is fine for Starcrossed because you can play as normal people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of which, I'm going to get really warm in about an hour, so I'm going to take off my exterior shirt. Don't worry. I've got something underneath.
Oh, so we get a show along with that.
This is just talk about geeky shirts. Reminded me I have one underneath, so. All set over there, Rich?
Yeah, sorry. I keep trying to run the show.
Yeah.
It's just reflex. Sorry.
You want to? That's fine.
Don't let me take over. I've taken over too many shows.
No, that's what we do. That's why we have other people here. We're like, please explain it to us.
Yeah, run our show for us.
Hello, team. Welcome to Creation Cast.
Beautiful. We have it all scripted if you'd like. You can just read the script for us. You can pretend your name is Amelia.
No, I don't have to read them this time. Or write them, which was really nice.
Exactly.
But Rich also knows not scary facts, too, because sometimes you can call him from the grocery store and say, my kids want to know why the lobsters in the corner of the tank are in a pile. And he says,
He says, wow. And then I make up some answer and
it sounded smart. It's fine.
They're not supposed to be in a tank.
Yeah, first of all, right. Yeah, exactly. That was the thing. It's like there's nothing in the tank, and they typically live trying to hide in rocks. So they're probably just hiding under each other.
I think the answer is they need to be eaten.
Oh,
That's scary.
Getting some psychological insight into Amelia right now.
Yes, right. Learning about my parenting style, which is those lobsters are for eating, children. Don't worry about it.
There's a very important comma in that statement.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Very important comma. Okay.
We're just so excited about this. Like,
So excited.
So is that a setup question?
no.
Okay.
Brian will ask the actual question.
The actual question is incoming.
Incoming.
All right.
Hold on. I had a thing.
Yeah.
Cut out me thinking about the thing. Never mind. I lost the thing.
Look, I have a cell phone. I have some super glue. We're good to go.
It's basically the same thing. Yeah.
I was high school teacher. Might as well have all the phones super glued to the kids' hands already.
Yep.
And Amelia's head. No. Oh, I own it.
Nope.
Oh, I'm sure you do. No, I just, GURPS.
We may cover it at some point.
Oh, do we have to?
We may cover it at some point.
Anytime somebody says run it in GURPS, there are at least 3 other systems that are better for running that game.
Let's not destroy my childhood. That's all I have to say. Anyway,
I started playing role-playing games with
in the back in the day too.
D20 Modern. So.
Mine was Hero System, but it basically was the predecessor to GURPS. So there you go.
Ryan, I found a Palladium book in my house. Actually, it was in my car today. Apparently, Dan left a bunch of like RPG books in the trunk of my car. And I don't know if he knows that they're there, but yeah, one of them was Palladium, and I was going to text you a picture earlier because I was like, "Oh, look what I found in the trunk of my car."
Yeah, it is. If we did a third volume, I said we. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
If we did
any other way,
I don't, but I'm obsessed. So
we're going to edit the show opener now to say, Rich Howard, you may know him from Blue Planet version 3.
Stop making my dreams come true.
I'll tell you what, Rich. I won't. I refuse to do a 3rd edition unless you're involved. How's that?
Okay, hold on. I gotta recover.
We broke Rich Howard, everybody.
Oh no. He's only 1/7 of the way to his t-shirt.
I can't talk.
Give him a little verklempt.
Verklempt, that's what I was going to say.
I said, you're going to have to recover because you're only 1/7 of the way to your t-shirt.
Oh, that's right. I got 7 more to go. All right.
Oh, that's amazing.
I love you, Jeff. All right. Off we go.
Okay, so now you've said I love you to your wife and to Jeff, and Ryan and I are feeling really left out.
I said I love all of you guys.
Just kidding.
Don't make me go on social media.
I think it's in the recording.
That's right. Okay. All right. Enough of. Okay. Let's get back on track.
Okay.
Derailing me, Jeff.
Jeez, Jeff.
I know. I'm terrible.
What a jerk.
I'm a monster.
You're a monster. Okay. Where are we at? I don't even know where we're at. I'm not looking at an outline, so I have no idea where we are. All right. I mean, edit the crap out of us, please.
Oh, yeah. I'll just put it all at the end.
Okay. You do whatever you need, man. And then what role were you going to be in this like rescue team? You said you were like expert dancer and what else?
Diplomacy.
Oh, you're our face.
Yeah.
That's not surprising.
I know. I was trying really hard to pick something different this time, and I can't do it.
But now I really want a sandwich because you're eating a sandwich. And apparently 3 hours ago, Amelia was talking about peanut butter sandwiches on Twitter.
I have no other food in my house because I refuse to go grocery shopping. I have to do it. I have to suck it up and do it, and I don't want to.
Just do it.
I never had to do it.
It's not that bad.
That was one of my conditions when I got married. I said, I will do all of the laundry forever, but I will not go grocery shopping. I will not do it. I hate it. I hate it.
That's so interesting.
It might have changed now, though.
I've been to a grocery store since then. I've had to pick up like 1 or 2 things, but I've not had to like...
You didn't just buy 6 of those lobsters?
I did not. They were very cute lobsters. They offered to take one out of the tank. They're like, do you want to see it? And I was like, no, we don't want to be friends with it. Like, no.
No.
I was like, do you want us to name it too?
Rich Howard.
Now we pick our I was like gonna sound really intelligent, and then I totally lost my thought. Gosh.
Character Creation Cast is hosted by the One Shot Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, visit oneshotpodcast.com, where you'll find other great shows like Talking Tabletop.
Talking Tabletop is an interview-style podcast created for tabletop gamers. Jim McClure talks with industry leaders to find out what makes them tick. The goal is to celebrate this incredible community of people and offer an avenue for collaboration between themselves, this community, and those pushing tabletop innovation.